Hello, everyone, and welcome to Keeping Girls and Women Engaged in Soccer. My name is Annie Ulliac, and I'm so happy to be a part of this event that Scottish is putting on. I'm a goalkeeper on the Scottish women's team, and I played university soccer for 5 years in the NCAA before now continuing to play in youth sports. I'm so excited to introduce Dr. Tracy Vaillancourt for her presentation on keeping girls and women engaged in soccer. Dr. Vaillancourt is a Tier 1 Canada Research Chair in School-Based Mental Health and Violence Prevention at the University of Ottawa, where she is cross-appointed as a full professor in counseling psychology in the Faculty of Education and in school psychology in the Faculty of Social Sciences. She is president-elect of the International Society for Research on Aggression and is an elected member of the College of the Royal Society of Canada. Dr. Vaillancourt's research examines the link between bullying and mental health with a particular focus on social neuroscience. Dr. Vaillancourt also holds a Canada Soccer National B license and is a coach-developer apprentice with Canada Soccer. She's also a provincial coach with Ontario Soccer and a member of their technical advisory committee. So welcome today. We are so excited to watch your presentation, and thank you everyone who's watching for joining us.
Thanks, Annie, and I'm so happy to hear you're a goalkeeper. I have a passion for goalkeepers. So today I'm going to talk about keeping girls and women engaged in soccer, and then I think we're going to have a little bit of a discussion at the end. Is that right, Annie?
Yes, correct.
Okay, sounds good. So what I'm hoping is that the discussion is going to lead to us being a little bit more inclusive in our environments, and specifically by addressing implicit biases. And I think if we address implicit biases, which are going to get defined in a few minutes, this will impact our future environments and hopefully our overall success. However you want to define success, because it doesn't necessarily have to be how many goals you save or how many goals you actually execute. So however you define success, hopefully we're going to have girls and women be more successful in soccer. And then with that in mind, what ultimately we want is we want girls and women to enjoy the sport more than they do. We want them to have better performance and better participation. And we want to retain them. And this is a really big focus of today's talk, Annie, is about retention, the retention of athletes and the retention of coaches. So if we look at the latest Canada Soccer annual report, what we see is that the split between women and men is not equal. And we shouldn't expect that. I mean, we're not there yet. We will get there, I hope. But really what concerns me, though, is the number of participants who are adults. So we're not keeping women or men engaged in soccer, and we're particularly not keeping women engaged in soccer. And Annie, you just mentioned that you played for 5 years and you're still playing. And what I hope is that you're going to be an old bird like me and still playing. And, you know, it's so much fun. It brings so much to my life. And this is what I want for everybody. Anyhow, so the numbers are like not great in terms of retention, but the numbers are good in terms of overall participation of women and girls in Canada. In fact, Canada, along with the United States, is leading the world on registered players, registered female players. So if you look at this map from FIFA, you see that Canada's got 290,000 registered players, and about 40% of them are women and girls. And the United States has obviously the most registered. But because we have this many registered players, we should be at the top of everything, I think. So we're leading the world in terms of statistics of how many people we have registered, but what we're not doing is leading the world on retention of players. So this is a slide that just speaks to sports in general in Canada. So we know that 1 in 3 girls are dropping out of sports in Canada. And that, when we compare it to boys, is quite high. So only 1 in 10 boys drop out of soccer. And I recall from the last presentation, there was a discussion about how one of the coaches noticed that girls tend to leave soccer when they're in adolescence. And that's actually something that's true. And it was born from the research that we do see that girls tend to leave in adolescence. Specifically, they leave by about 14 or 15. And there's a precipitous drop in participation by around that age. So we're doing well in terms of our numbers, but we have a notable problem that's specific to Canada, United States, and specific to soccer and specific to girls and women. And really what it's showing the data is that girls and women are leaving soccer in the United States and Canada at a higher rate than baseball, a higher rate than hockey, at a higher rate than badminton, you name the sport. So there's something about soccer that is not attractive to the women, not attractive to the girls in the sport, and we're having a hard time keeping them in. So why is this the case? So this is something that I've been thinking about long and hard. I've been a coach for over 20 years. I study women, I study girls. So I've been thinking about this long and hard. And everything I'm presenting here, by the way, is not based on opinion, although it certainly corresponds with my opinion and what my observations are, but it's based on research. So one of the reasons why we're seeing this dropout specific to soccer is because we have a win at all cost mentality of adults. So Canada Soccer is really working hard on trying to change this, and a lot of the provinces and territories are trying hard to change this mentality. So, I mean, when I used to coach little kid soccer, even as early as like 10 years ago, we would keep scores of 9-year-olds. We would go to tournaments and win trophies at the end. I felt pressure to, play my best line in order to win the tournament. And we're talking about 9-year-olds. So that needs to change. And we know that if we change this win at all cost mentality, that we're going to retain kids. And they tell us that they're not interested per se in the trophy. What they're interested in is the relationships. What they're interested in is the sport and mastering it. So we need to get away from our ideas of what we want and start thinking about what they want. The other thing is that we ability group players before they are psychologically and emotionally ready. So we tend to decide really early in Canada, we're getting better, but historically we've been terrible at this, where we tier them way too early. And I know a lot of parents like that, but a lot of kids don't like this. And it's really ultimately about the kids. So what we don't want to do is decide when somebody's 8 if they're going to be the next Christine Sinclair, because we cannot predict that. In fact, we shouldn't even be making those predictions at 15. We all have a different pathway. Some peak early, some peak late. The evidence tends to support that individuals who peak late tend to stay in the game at an elite level for longer than those who've peaked early. So we really got to get away from this if we want to retain girls and women and boys and men as well. The other thing is that we don't tend to keep players' rights and needs as our primary focus. So we really should be focusing on the individual and their needs. And again, not the adults' needs, not the coach's needs. And if we did that, if we had a player-centered approach, we would keep them in soccer longer. But the real, one of the main issues that we have problems with retention is because we focus on tactics and skills at the expense of relationships. And this is a huge problem. And kids tell us over and over again that what they value most in soccer is relationships. The relationships matter to everybody. We have a fundamental need to belong. It's biologically based. This need to belong is particularly salient for girls and women, and even for professional women. And the bulk of my research to date, and the stuff that kind of makes me most famous as a psychologist, is my work on women and how we relate to each other and how relationships matter most to us. So we need to start focusing on what matters most to girls and women, and that's relationships. And I know the last speaker spoke about this, and I know that there's going to be a specific presentation on this by Dr. Vicky, I think it's Harbour. And so anyhow, I'm really looking forward to her talk on the sense of belonging in girls and women. So along with relationships, we also don't focus on gender equity. So what we've done is we've kind of gone into this territory of equality over equity. And gender equity is well defined by the Canadian Women in Sports. So they say it's the process of allocating resources, programs, and decision-making fairly for all genders without any discrimination on the basis of their gender, and address the imbalances and the benefits available to people of different genders. So what does this mean practically? What does this mean in the real world? So if you think about equality, equality is about being equal. So here they give this great example of a bike. Everybody gets a bike, everybody's happy. But they're not really, because you have somebody who's 6'3", who's on a bike that's designed for somebody who's 4'3", and that's not going to work. You have somebody who has a mobility issue who's given the same bike as somebody who doesn't. So even though we say, hey, look, this is equal, everybody's getting the same thing, the truth of the matter is people have different needs. So really what we need to be looking for is equality. And equality means that everybody gets the bike, but the bike is designed to meet their needs. So if you think about this, Annie, in terms of soccer, like I think you probably went through your whole career getting a boys kit to play soccer in, right? And I think about like all of the showcase tournaments you've gone to and all the showcase tournaments I brought my team to. How often were we given the really crummy slot, right? You get the slot that no coach is ever going to show up to because it's 8 o'clock in the morning and they're all hungover or disinterested in that time slot for a variety of reasons. And so you spent a lot of money for not really much of a return. And so we need to be thinking about things like this. So it's not just about saying we have a tournament for boys and girls. It's about saying that we have a tournament for boys and girls and girls and boys are going to get preference on the good slots. They're going to get very good fields. We're not going to put the boys on the best field and the girls on the crummy field. So we're going to highlight both. And not, so again, it's not enough to say that we have boys and girls at this tournament. We have to keep in mind that they have different needs. So that's one reason. And I'm going to park that because I know that's going to get addressed throughout the day. But I really want to also talk about another retention issue, and it's about implicit biases, which is really the focus of my talk. So we don't focus enough on implicit biases. And in fact, most people don't even know they have them. So implicit biases, which are also sometimes called unconscious biases, have to deal with associations that are outside of your awareness. And these subconscious beliefs lead to negative evaluations about a person that's based on characteristics that aren't even relevant, like gender. Gender should not factor into this per se, and yet it does. So I'm just going to show you a quick video that describes it way better than I can.
Neuroscience and social psychology has shed light onto the concept of unconscious bias. But what exactly is unconscious bias, and how does it affect our behaviors and decisions? Unconscious biases are simply our unintended people preferences. They are formed by our socialization, our personal experiences, and the representations of different groups in the media. These experiences act as social filters in which we make assessments and judgments of people around us. Research tells us that human beings have a natural tendency to place individuals into social categories. These categories are often based on visual cues such as gender, cultural background, age, height, or body size. We also categorize based on social background, job roles, religious identity, or political affiliation. The unconscious brain uses associations based on social categories to develop biases. For example, if we are constantly exposed to women as primary school teachers or receptionists, or men as plumbers and organizational leaders, these associations become wired within the human brain. The unconscious brain uses social categories to make unconscious judgments about people who are similar to us and people who are different from us. A common form of unconscious bias is affinity bias. This type of bias impacts talent processes in organizational decision-making, including how we recruit. Managers are more likely to hire people who look similar or with sounding names to them. Work allocation. Managers are more likely to assign key client projects to individuals within their teams who they have an unconscious affinity with. Performance. Where there is some kind of affinity, managers are more likely to spend time informally discussing positive contributions to the team and will focus on development and future work plans. For those where there is little affinity, managers are more likely to question past performance. The conversation will be less friendly and even hostile at times. Unconscious bias often results in a set of micro-behaviors. Examples of positive micro-behaviors include supporting the ideas of someone with who you have an unconscious affinity whilst in a team meeting, or simply wanting to have coffee with someone like you. Examples of negative micro-behaviors include checking emails on your phone whilst talking to a colleague, or cutting someone off in a meeting. Often our intention is not to make biased decisions, and through a focus on conscious thinking, and by creating inclusive work cultures, we can learn to control our unconscious judgments and mitigate the impact of bias on our talent programs. New research.
So there are tremendous real world implications. So people might think, well, what's the big deal, right? But the big deal is pretty big. So for example, this may seem like minor, but committees with implicit biases tend to promote fewer women. In the healthcare area, which is something that I work in, healthcare professionals' implicit biases influence diagnosis and treatment decisions. So people make decisions that can cost a person their life. Recently in the media, there was this example of a man who was crawling out of a Canadian ER. And he kept telling the medical staff that he had tremendous pain, and they weren't listening to him. They thought he was there to seek drugs. And so anyhow, when he's crawling out of the ER, the nurse you could hear her saying, "Get up, big boy, come on, you can walk." And he thinks that he was treated so poorly because when they did the intake, they asked him if he had any health concerns or previous health concerns. And he mentioned that he was bipolar and that he was medicated for the past 7 years for being bipolar. Turns out he had Guillain-Barré syndrome, which is incredibly painful. He had a legitimate reason for his pain, not that pain is illegitimate, but the point just being is that they made a decision as soon as he said he had a psychiatric history, that they made a decision of what he was there for, and that had real world implications for his health and wellness. We see this in teaching all the time. Implicit biases contribute to teachers' actions and their decisions. For example, it's actually linked to the educational attainment of their students, the appraisal of their students' abilities. So, are you going to give somebody the benefit of the doubt or not? And how is that going to affect your grading? And it even affects the rates of suspension. I recently consulted on a case where 2 little girls got into a fight, a physical fight. And the black girl was suspended and the white girl was not. And they were both in the fight. And this happens in Canada in 2021. Implicit biases affect sport all the time. So I've been a coach for many, many years, and I can't tell you how many times I go to a tournament or even a game, and the referee will come up and ask me for the game sheet and think I'm the manager. I've never, ever been confused for being the head coach. It just doesn't happen. Like, even though I am the head coach, they tend to think I'm the manager or the mom on the bench. I went to a tournament with my soccer team where we won it 3 years in a row. And the same guy gave out the trophy every year. And he kept asking me, and the 3rd year I finally had enough. He asked me every time, "Where's the head coach?" And I would say, "Dude, I am the head coach." Right? And Annie, this is going to be very salient for you because the implicit biases that happen in sports have implication for safety. And I'll give you an example from a D1 game that happened where the keeper is going to get clipped in the face. So we're going to watch it. It's not the best quality video, so we'll watch it twice just so you can see it, but really pay attention to what's happening with this keeper. So she gets a cleat to the face, right? And we'll just watch it again in case it came by so quickly. I just want you to see it, not because I'm a sadist. Okay, so this cleat to the face broke her nose and resulted in stitches. So, it could have broken her neck. This could have had the most serious implications ever. The ref took the player who cleated her in the face to the side and had a long discussion, and after a long discussion decided that it was a yellow card offense. It is not a yellow card offense. It's a red card offense. There's nothing to think about. And the reason why the person wasn't given a red card, I think, is because it's a woman. And the laws of the game, right, Annie, they do not exist differently for men and women and girls and boys. They're the same laws of the game. But what we tend to see, and what research is showing, is that it is affecting the decision-making of referees. So there are implications for the health and wellness of our athletes. We know that implicit biases emerge under certain conditions. So they tend to emerge when there's a lack of representation, when there's an organizational culture that promotes them, when organizations are hierarchically organized, when situations are ambiguous. So in ambiguous situations, we tend to default to our stereotypes, to these unconscious beliefs, and when people hold certain groups in higher esteem than others. So if you value men more than you value women, there are going to be more implicit biases. If you value whites over people of color, you're going to have an implicit bias that works against people of color. And these implicit biases then they have an advantage to certain groups. Brager just wrote a great review of basically the sociology of sports. And they talk about how sports are built on norms that society has established, which is 100% true. They also talk about how our sports system reflects our societal biases. So if you want to know what the biases are, look at the inequalities that we see in sport. Look at the inequalities that we see represented in government, in other leadership positions. And when our sports system reflects these biases, what we see is that it perpetuates biased policies and practices, which then maintain the status quo, a culture of tolerance and exclusivity. So we're not going to challenge the status quo. We're going to accept the status quo, and we're just going to think that this is the way it's going to be, and it's always going to be. And we also then, it perpetuates a system, the condoning of abuse and oppression. So there's a systemic abuse of power that occurs. And this is a problem. And it's something that we're also going to be talking about a little bit later when Kiara McCormick talks about making soccer safer. And the big kicker of all of this is that people leave, because why would people stay in a system that they're not valued? They don't stay in systems in which they're not valued, in which they're not contributing members of that organization. It's so fortuitous because Adam Grant, who's an organizational psychologist, just posted this morning, and I love everything he does. But it was like spot on. It couldn't have come out at a better time. He talks about how the most direct way to figure out what we value in a culture isn't necessarily to listen to what people say is important, because people are going to talk about what they think you want to hear, right? They're going to give you the right script. It's going to be a bunch of rhetoric. He talks about what you need to do is pay attention to who gets rewarded and who gets promoted into leadership roles. That he talks about how groups elevate people who represent their principles and advance their goals. And we know this. I mean, Annie, you mentioned that you did your master's in clinical psychology. I mean, we know that there are, people always have biases and they're trying to impression manage. And so, of course, asking them what they think we want to hear is going to get what you want to have heard, right? And then interestingly, this is going to also be addressed. It's almost like my talk was thought of a priori. So we have Amy Harrison, who's following me, and she's going to talk about where are all the girls and women. And these implicit biases leave people to leave. So losing girls and women is a cost borne to all Canadians. So I need to show you another keeper video just to keep this in the background when we're talking and having our discussion. So this is little Ellie Erickson. She's a U8 player. She was playing on a boys team in a tournament. And she's going to do something with this PK that might be special. And Annie's going to love the form. Like, this is good technique, right, Annie? Okay, so just think about, how does this translate to other areas of this little girl's life, right? So the success that we have on the field, the leadership that you learn in these moments, right, gets translated into the classroom, gets translated into her peer interactions. And what do you think about the little boys and what they think about little girls who succeed in this area? It elevates their impression of girls. It debunks their stereotypes about girls' ability to play. So I love this video for all those reasons. And this is why we need to keep them in sports, and we need to keep them in soccer. We want to retain as many girls and as many women as possible, because soccer is a powerful agent of social change. It advances the status of women. It challenges our stereotypes. It creates leaders. It creates productive and healthy citizens. And we'll just have one more video. This one's a bit of a tearjerker.
We're never alone. And that is our strength. Because when we're doubted, we'll play as one. When we're held back, we'll go farther and harder. If we're not taken seriously, we'll prove that wrong. And if we don't fit the sport, we'll change the sport. We know things won't always go our way.
And the world's sporting events are postponed or cancelled.
But whatever it is, we'll find a way. And when things aren't fair, we'll come together for change.
We have a responsibility
to make this world a better place. And no matter how bad it gets, we will always come back stronger. Because nothing can stop what we can do together.
I love the tagline, if we don't fit the sport, we will change the sport. I love it. So I think that we need to do a few things. I mean, obviously this doesn't represent the panacea. There's going to be more, and there's going to be a lot of discussion throughout the day. But I think that we need to first think about how we're going to prioritize equity. So move away from this idea of equality. You know, maybe not all women and girls want to play sports or soccer at the same level as men and boys. But when they do play it, we better make sure that we're providing, that we're meeting their needs, that we're providing for them. And I do think we need to formally address our biases. Our biases are really holding us back. And if we do that, I think we'll be in a better position. So there you have it. I'm happy to discuss this now. Oh, my timing, I'm sorry, I was 2 minutes early. I jumped out 2 minutes early. My apologies.
That is absolutely all right. We have a couple of questions here for you already. So this first one is on the sports psychology side of things. Do you have any tips for players who struggle with self-confidence and putting too much pressure on themselves?
So I did a presentation just the other day on this for Ontario Soccer. And one of the things what we see overly represented in sports is perfectionism. And a lot of times people will use perfectionism as a positive trait, but there's actually nothing inherently positive about perfectionism. Perfectionism is about black and white thinking. You either succeed or you fail. And the cognitions of people who are perfectionistic are very similar to the cognitions of people who have depression. So we are worried about perfectionism, and it's something I study a lot. I study a lot about the links between perfectionism and performance, academic performance, athletic performance, and also how it relates to mental health like anxiety and depression. So with that said, you really need to get away from this, this all or none, this dichotomy in thinking. And Annie, as a clinical psychology student, you know that I'm going to go to cognitive behavioral therapy on this. So really, I mean, not that coaches are going to be able to do this, but what you can do is focus on process more than product with kids who are perfectionistic. So I think we need to get away from always highlighting the goal scorers, because it's a team effort, right? And if you emphasize the things they can control, and the controllables are how much effort they put into something and how much attention they pay. So about self-regulation, executive functioning skills and the like, if you put effort, if you praise that effort over the product, you'll get away from these perfectionistics, I guess, ideologies or patterns of thinking. Because in the end, it actually destroys children and youth. So we really want to have them rethink this.
That's awesome. I love all that. That's definitely, I've seen a lot of people struggle with perfectionism. I've struggled with it. It's very, very difficult when you want to balance being a good high-level athlete who pushes themselves, while also realizing that we all make mistakes, and that's important too.
Totally. And it's funny, Annie, so if you've ever heard any of my talks, which I don't think you have, but if you have, I am so consistent on this point. I can't stand when a keeper lets in a soft goal and all the players turn their back to that individual. I mean, it is the most vulnerable position on the field. And at that point, it's when they need you to help them rise, right? So as a good teammate, you help them rise up again. And you recognize that mistakes are made all over the pitch. They're just not highlighted. And we never really admonish the striker who misses the net completely. And they do that throughout the whole game. But the keepers, if they let in one soft goal, you never hear the end of it. And they know that, and they need more support. So I think that if we also, lived our values and recognize it's a team sport. So the value is it's a team sport, so that we then elevate all members of our team, then we'll be in a better position as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So our next question goes in a different direction, but I think this is a really interesting topic as well. So soccer is typically a very international, very diverse sport. Does religion, culture, country of origin, socioeconomic factors impact soccer more than other sports?
I wouldn't know about that per se, but I can speculate on what would happen, because I do know that that the distribution of girls and boys' participation in Canada is linked to religion and cultural background. But I'll speak specifically to girls because it's a topic that obviously this is a symposium on girls and women in soccer. So there are some cultural groups that don't support daughters playing soccer. There's a whole history of why that would be, and it's a complicated history. But we do tend to see that soccer on the girl side tends to be more homogeneous in its representation. So it tends to be more affluent white girls than other groups. And the same thing is true for the United States, which is interesting, because then when you look at it on the boys' side, that's not necessarily the case. And it's certainly not the case around the world, right? The nice thing about soccer is that all you need is a ball. And even that, I went to Zambia to work and give a bunch of lectures on child development. And I went to an orphanage, and we played soccer with a ball that was made from bags that they just wrapped around and wrapped around and wrapped around, right? Nobody had shoes on except for me. And we had this ball. And I can tell you, like, their skill was amazing. On a dirt field, they knew where all the ditches were and all the crevices and all the rocks that you need to avoid. I didn't. I got scraped up pretty good. But that's all they needed. And that's the beauty of the sport. So it's a great equalizer. But for some reason in North America, it is quite elite. And maybe if we opened it up and made it more accessible, we'd be in a better position in terms of retention and leadership and the like.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the biggest issues that we have going forward from now, I guess, is the best time to start, since we didn't already start so much, but making soccer more accessible to everybody, especially in North America.
Yeah.
So our next question is there one recommendation you would give right now that a sports club could implement to improve female programming, and what would you do as a first step?
Wow. Did that question get asked? That's a tough question. I actually get asked this a lot. And I mean, we're looking for a quick fix, and I understand that because we need to right a lot of wrongs. I think that one of the things is representation. So we need to invest in women coaches, and some clubs are doing a great job at it and other clubs are not. One of the things that worries me too is that they just think, so back to that equality versus equity, that if you just hire women, it's going to fix itself. But it's not, because there's a lot of barriers to women in coaching. And then there's a lot of issues with support. So you'll know this to be true, Annie, like the women that have coached you have all been players, right? Like we cannot coach without showing that we can play. And the men don't necessarily have to have been players. And so we're tolerant of their knowledge base and expect that it's better than ours, whereas we have to be better. We have to be beyond reproach in our knowledge base, in our technique, and our delivery, everything. Because, you know, we have a lot of people working against us. And so if you hire women, they also have to have meaningful involvement. They can't be picking up your cones. That is not representation. That actually probably causes more harm than not having women. We need women there in meaningful roles, and we need to support them and understand the biases that are against them in order to retain them, and also in order to give them a chance to grow.
Right. Absolutely. Agree with that. Well, is there anything that you would really like to emphasize or just restate again that you would like people to take away from your presentation as we wrap this up? And thank you again. That was absolutely incredible to listen to your presentation on this topic.
Oh, thank you. Not really. Like, I guess I just covered like a fraction of a complex issue. And I don't want people leaving thinking, okay, we've got it solved. Like she says, fix two things and it's going to be okay. Because it's not. I mean, we have a history of bias. We have a history of stereotypes. We have a history of oppression. So there's a lot of work that has to be done. Change does not occur in a vacuum. Change does not occur overnight. So it's going to take a lot of work. I'm currently writing a book on women and women's interpersonal relationships. And one of the things and I could have given a different talk and it would have been on this, but I heard it a little bit in the other presentation, where women need to support women. And we think we do, but we really don't. I mean, what's made me most famous as a psychology professor has been my work on how we don't support each other. So I don't want us to be that way. I want us to support each other, to not compete with each other, to recognize that everybody has their strengths, and your strengths may not be my strengths, but I can celebrate your strengths. And I think if we did that, we'd be in a better position. Because if you have not all men supporting you and not all women supporting you, you've got a lot of people not supporting you. And there are real world implications. So in our book, we talk about elections, like even, I know this is American politics, but it had implications for what happened to Hillary Clinton. And so it's not a passing comment. It's a comment that's made from years and years of research and thinking hard and thinking in earnest about this topic. So I would want women to be better to women and girls to be better to each other.
Okay, that's very interesting. And just one last question that's from me, actually.
Okay.
To wrap up. So we did talk a lot today, and in lots of the other presentations as well, about sort of the organizational changes that we can make. But you said that you really specialize a lot in women supporting women. So what are some recommendations that you might have for sort of the individual interpersonal level of support that we can have as female coaches, female mentors, or even peer-to-peer on a team to help support other women in sports and help keep them in the game and have the best environment possible?
It's a really good question. So I always think about it like getting away from this idea of a zero-sum game. Part of the reason why women engage in zero-sum games is because we don't perceive enough opportunities for us. So there has to be a bit of a cultural change. There has to be a structural change, right? There has to be change in the way we have representation, the way organizations have women represented within their structure. But the thing is that it's not doing us any good, right? So for our book, we actually had a woman that was part of the Women's March in the United States contacted us, and we're going to include this in our book, about how she was treated poorly by the other women while doing the Women's March, right? So there's this idea that there's not enough space at the top, so we eat our own, and that's a problem. So if we recognize that that's not true, right? I mean, in some ways it is, but what we would do is we would change that balance of representation if we supported each other more. And then just a final thing, just about like when organizations think, well, I've got one woman on our board of directors, so things are okay. That's not okay, because study after study shows that you have to reach a critical mass in order for those women to then affect change. So if I'm one woman on a board of directors with a room of 9 other men, I'm not going to be listened to. But once you get to 30% women representing, then they're more likely to get heard. So it's not enough to just have one. You have to have enough to affect change. So I know that was like a bit long-winded, and I hope that it was clear enough, but basically just to get away from this idea that there's not enough resources and therefore we need to compete with each other. There are not enough resources, but we don't need to compete with each other. We can get there by collaborating and supporting.
Awesome, thank you. Thank you so much. And I know I said that was the last question, but we do have a couple more minutes left, and we did get a late question in.
Okay.
So this one I think would take more than a couple minutes to thoroughly answer, but what are your thoughts on sports as a meritocracy?
I mean, ultimately, I want people to be promoted because of their talent and their effort. And you know, the thing about sports, especially when it's an objective sport, where there's something where a person, you know, Annie, you and I can go out to a field and I can think I'm faster than you, but at the end of the day, if you cross that line before I did, it's hard to argue that, right? But soccer has like a lot of nuances where we place value on things that kind of like that implicit bias video talked about, you know, how we make meaning and we identify with people who are more like us and that sort of thing. So there's a lot of there's a subjective component to it. I know I'm not answering the question because I'm not too sure, because I just think that it's sports dependent. And when it comes to soccer, there's more room for error than there is in, let's say, a swim competition. And so my concern is that we make maybe almost too many mistakes, right? And so then what happens is that when people aren't valued and they're not recognized, they leave. So yeah, I'm not too sure. I think that there's a lot of room for mistakes in our field, and we're far from objective, and we need to start recognizing that because there is a subjective component to it. I always think about, did you ever see the movie, you know, with Brad Pitt, Moneyball? Did you ever see that movie?
No, I didn't actually.
I always use this as a reference because there's this great scene where the scouts are in the room and they're talking about this baseball player and they're saying, you know, he's not that good of a player. And they're like, the stats support that he is. And they're like, no, he doesn't have a good looking girlfriend. And if you don't have a good looking girlfriend, you don't have confidence. If you don't have confidence, you're not a good player. And it's like, yeah, exactly. So they're ignoring the statistics for their subjective opinion. And I think that happens in soccer all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you again so much for presenting today, for sharing your knowledge on this topic. I know I really enjoyed it, and I know everybody watching was really grateful to have you here. So thank you again.
Thank you, Annie, and good luck with your season.
Thank you.
Okay, take care.